July 4th, 1956.
In Westbury, Long Island, the afternoon carried all the familiar comforts of an American holiday. Families were home, the streets felt safe, and later, the sky would fill with fireworks. On the rear patio of a small suburban house, a 1-month-old baby named Peter Weinberger slept in his carriage, while his mother, Betty, remained only a few steps away. She went inside for a few minutes. When she returned, the carriage was still there. Peter was not. Near the empty carriage was a sheet of notebook paper covered in green handwriting. The person who had taken Peter said he was watching the house, demanded $2,000, and threatened to kill the baby if the family made one wrong move. Then he made a promise. If Betty and her husband Morris followed his instructions, Peter would be returned the following day, safe and happy. The Weinbergers had less than 24 hours to decide whether they could trust the man who had just stolen their child. And somewhere nearby, that man may already have been watching them. Before that afternoon, there was nothing remarkable about the Weinberger home. And that was part of what made the case so frightening. Betty and Morris were not celebrities, political figures, or members of a wealthy family whose name might attract a professional kidnapper. They were a middle-class couple raising their children in a growing Long Island suburb. Peter was their youngest, born only about a month earlier, still young enough that every part of his life depended on someone else. He could not crawl away, and he could not call for help. On that 4th of July afternoon, Betty placed him in his carriage on the rear patio of the family home on Albemarle Road. The carriage was close to the house. Peter was sleeping, and nothing about the moment felt dangerous. That is how safety usually feels before it disappears. Not dramatic, not fragile, simply normal. Betty stepped indoors briefly, but when she looked outside again, something seemed wrong. She returned to the patio and looked into the carriage. It was empty. For a moment, her mind must have searched for a harmless explanation. Perhaps Morris had picked Peter up. Perhaps another family member had moved him. Or perhaps, seconds later, everyone would laugh from the relief of discovering some small misunderstanding. But Peter was nowhere inside the house. Then Betty saw the note. It had been written on paper torn from a student notebook. The words formed in green ink. The writer began by apologizing, saying he was sorry this had to happen, and claiming he desperately needed money and could not obtain it any other way. For a few lines, he sounded less like a predator than a frightened man trying to explain himself. Then the note became a threat. He warned the family not to contact police and said he was watching the house closely. At their first wrong move, he would kill Peter. The writer demanded $2,000 in small bills, which had to be placed beside a signpost at the corner of Albemarle Road and Park Avenue at exactly 10 o'clock the following morning. If everything went smoothly, Peter would be brought to the same corner at noon. The note ended with 2 words: "Your babysitter." The signature was almost playful, and that made it worse. The person who had taken Peter seemed to be shifting between apology, reassurance, and violence. He wanted the family to believe he felt guilty, but he also wanted them to believe he was capable of killing their child. Was the apology genuine? Was the writer panicking, or was the softness simply another way to control them? Betty and Morris could not assume the threat was empty, so despite the warning, they contacted Nassau County Police. From that moment on, every decision carried 2 dangers. If they disobeyed the kidnapper, Peter might die. If they obeyed him completely, they would be placing their faith in the person who had taken him. Outside, the neighborhood still looked ordinary. Houses stood beneath the summer sky, and families elsewhere continued their 4th of July. Inside the Weinberger home, however, the holiday was over. Everything had narrowed to one piece of paper, one demand, and one promise. Peter would be back by noon tomorrow. All they had to do was survive the night.
The first problem appeared inside the kidnapper's own instructions. He had told the Weinbergers to leave the money at the corner of Albemarle Road and Park Avenue, But Albemarle Road curved and met Park Avenue in two different places. There were two intersections, two signposts, and two possible ransom locations.
Had the writer made a careless mistake? Or had he deliberately created confusion, allowing him to approach whichever corner looked safer? Police could not risk choosing the wrong one, so they prepared two packages, one for each location. Paper was arranged to resemble bundles of money, with recorded bills placed around it, while the real ransom money remained ready. Morris also appealed to the newspapers. Do not publish the story yet. Wait until Peter is safely returned. Publicity could fill the neighborhood with reporters and strangers, frighten the kidnapper away, or convince him that the family had ignored his warning. Most newspapers agreed to wait. The New York Daily News did not. The kidnapping appeared on its front page, and by the following morning, Albemarle Road had changed. The quiet street now attracted police, reporters, photographers, and people who came simply because they wanted to see where a baby had disappeared. For Betty and Morris, the crowd created a terrifying contradiction. Public attention might help find Peter, but it might also make the person holding him feel trapped. At 10 o'clock on July 5th, both packages were placed beside the two signposts, and everyone waited. A ransom drop is supposed to produce movement. Someone approaches, a car slows down, a hand reaches for the package. But as the minutes passed, nothing happened. Every person near the intersection became suspicious for a moment. A pedestrian walking too slowly, a driver looking toward the curb, a parked car with someone sitting inside. Each possibility appeared and vanished. The packages remained untouched. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then more. No one came for the money. The Weinbergers still had one reason to hope, because the note had promised that Peter would be returned at noon. Perhaps the kidnapper had changed his plan. Perhaps he was waiting for the crowd to thin. Or perhaps he still intended to keep his word. For 2 more hours, Betty and Morris waited. At noon, they watched the corner where their child was supposed to appear. A 1-month-old baby could not arrive on his own. Someone would have to carry him. Any approaching vehicle might be the one, and any stranger might place Peter down and walk away. Noon came. The corner remained empty. There was no Peter, no message, and no explanation. The promise had expired. For the first time, the family had to confront the possibility that the person who took their son was not following a plan at all. He might be frightened, he might be losing control, or the promise that Peter would return safe and happy may never have been real. After the failed exchange, the Weinberger home became a place of waiting, and the telephone mattered more than anything else inside it. Every ring could bring new instructions, but it could also be a reporter, a stranger, or someone offering a false lead. The story spread beyond Long Island. People claimed to have seen Peter, while others claimed to know who had taken him. Each new lead carried the same cruel possibility. This one might be real. Betty and Morris made public appeals for Peter's return. Their son was only a month old, and whoever had him needed to understand how vulnerable he was. A baby that young could not simply be hidden and forgotten between ransom calls. He needed milk, warmth, and constant care. The kidnapper had demanded money, as though Peter were an object that could be stored somewhere until an exchange was complete. But Peter's body did not understand ransom negotiations. Each hour mattered. The family waited through July 5th, then July 6th, then another day. The man who claimed to be watching had fallen silent. Perhaps he was waiting for the police presence to disappear. Perhaps he had fled. Or perhaps Peter was still alive somewhere nearby. As long as there was no final answer, hope remained possible. But it did not remain peacefully. It lived inside every telephone ring, every unfamiliar car, and every hour that passed without Peter coming home. Then, 6 days after the kidnapping, the telephone rang again. On July 10th, a caller gave the Weinbergers new instructions. The ransom money was to be placed inside a mailbox at a designated location. After 6 days of silence, the voice meant Peter might still be alive. The kidnapper had returned, and he still wanted the money. If he still wanted the money, the family could believe Peter still mattered to him. Hope returned quickly because it had never fully left. The money was prepared, the instructions were followed, and police watched the location. Again, no one collected it.
The second exchange collapsed just as the first one had.
But later that same day, the telephone rang once more. This time, the caller directed the family toward an exit along the Northern State Parkway. At the location, investigators found a blue cloth bag near the road, and inside it was another handwritten note. The green handwriting had returned. The writer said that if everything went smoothly, Peter would be left near the Parkway exit closest to the Weinberger home within 1 hour. This promise was more specific. For Betty and Morris, the note gave shape to hope again. They could picture a car stopping near the exit, someone placing Peter safely beside the road, and police finding him. They could picture the telephone ringing with the words they had been waiting to hear. He is alive. We have him. The hour began. The money was ready. Investigators watched the area and vehicles moved along the parkway. The deadline approached. Then it passed. No one collected the ransom. No baby appeared near the exit. For the second time, the writer had made Peter's parents imagine the moment he would come home. And for the second time, he allowed the promised hour to arrive and left them with nothing. The repeated failure raised a question that was becoming impossible to ignore. Why would someone keep demanding money and then refuse to take it? If fear had ruined the first exchange, why arrange another? And why keep promising Peter's return if the kidnapper could not, or would not, return him? The second note proved that the writer was still active. It did not prove that Peter was still with him. On July 11th, the kidnapping entered its 7th day. Under federal law at the time, the FBI had been forced to wait before formally joining the case. On paper, 7 days was a legal threshold. Inside the Weinberger home, it was 7 days of not knowing whether Peter was being fed, and 7 days of waiting for promises that disappeared when the deadline arrived. When the FBI officially entered, agents established a temporary headquarters in Mineola and worked around the clock. Despite the national attention, however, the investigation had remarkably little solid evidence. No confirmed accomplice, no reliable eyewitness who had watched Peter being taken, no vehicle identified with certainty, and no known reason why the Weinberger family had been chosen. There were only the ransom notes, 2 sheets of paper, green ink, and a hand that had formed each word without realizing how much of itself it had left behind. Most people write without thinking about the movement. A letter appears, then the pen moves to the next one. But handwriting is built from habits. The angle of a stroke, the pressure applied to the page, and the way one letter connects to another. A person can try to disguise their writing, but small habits remain. FBI document examiners studied the ransom notes and identified distinctive patterns across 16 letters of the alphabet. One letter was particularly unusual. The writer formed a lowercase m in a way that looked almost like a sideways Z. It was a tiny flaw, the kind most people would never notice. But investigators did not need to find a perfect copy of the ransom note. They needed to find someone whose hand made the same mistakes. Agents were trained to recognize the distinctive letters, and then they began searching. Motor vehicle records, probation files, school documents, factory applications, and municipal forms. There was no computer capable of comparing the samples, so each page had to be examined by a person. One form at a time, one name at a time, one lowercase m at a time. Thousands of samples were eliminated, then hundreds of thousands. The number passed 1 million. Still, there was no match. For investigators, it was becoming one of the largest handwriting searches of its kind. For Betty and Morris, it was still a search for Peter. Weeks passed, tips continued to arrive, and the voice on the telephone did not return with another believable promise. At first, the question had been whether the Weinbergers could follow the instructions and bring Peter home. Now, the question was whether investigators could identify the writer before every path to Peter disappeared. By late August, almost 2 million handwriting samples had been examined. Then, in a probation office in Brooklyn, someone opened a file and saw a familiar letter. The handwriting belonged to a man named Angelo Lamarca. Lamarca had previously been arrested in connection with bootlegging, which meant samples of his writing were stored in a federal probation record. The lowercase m resembled the one in the ransom notes, and when investigators looked closer, other distinctive formations matched: the slant, the spacing, and the movement of the pen. The file was sent to FBI document examiners. After almost 2 million samples, the hand behind the notes finally had a name. Angelo Lamarca lived in Plainview, only a few miles from the Weinberger home. He was married and he had 2 children. Until that moment, the person who took Peter had existed only as a voice, 2 handwritten notes, and a series of broken promises. Now he had a home, a family, and a face. But identifying him created a more urgent question. If Lamarca had written the notes, did he still know where Peter was? The handwriting could lead investigators to the kidnapper. It could not tell them what he had done with the baby. Investigators found a man under severe financial pressure. According to the FBI's reconstruction, Lamarca lived in a house he could not afford, bills were accumulating, and he was facing threats from a loan shark. The ransom demand was not the enormous sum associated with a carefully planned kidnapping of a wealthy family. $2,000 was closer to the amount one desperate man believed might rescue him from his immediate problems. The Weinbergers had not been targeted because they possessed a hidden fortune. According to investigators, Lamarca had been driving through Westbury thinking about money when he saw Betty place Peter in the carriage and return inside. There had been no long surveillance operation, no personal grudge, and no connection between the 2 families. A sleeping baby had been visible from the road, and Lamarca had seen an opportunity. The randomness made the crime more disturbing. The person behind the ransom notes was not hiding across the country. He was living nearby with children of his own. Every day, the Weinbergers waited for Peter. Lamarca returned to his own home. And somewhere inside that ordinary life, he carried the answer to the question Peter's parents could not escape. In the early hours of August 23rd, FBI agents and Nassau County Police arrived at Lamarca's home and placed him under arrest. At first, Lamarca denied taking Peter, but then investigators confronted him with the handwriting evidence. Lamarca claimed he had written similar kidnapping notes as a joke and thrown them into a wastebasket. Someone else, he suggested, must have recovered them and used them in the actual crime. The explanation did not survive the evidence. His story changed. Then it changed again. Eventually, he admitted that he had taken Peter. Even while confessing, he tried to place shadows around the crime. He invented supposed accomplices, but investigators found no credible evidence that anyone had helped him. Lamarca was giving them the truth in fragments. Investigators did not need another story about the ransom note. They needed Peter. Where had he taken him? Was he alive? Lamarca's answer returned them to the morning of July 5th, the day of the first ransom exchange. He claimed that he had driven toward the drop site with Peter still in the vehicle, but as he approached, he saw police, reporters, and crowds near the intersection. He became frightened. He drove away. For a brief moment, this part of the confession created a terrible kind of hope. Peter had allegedly been alive the morning after the kidnapping. Perhaps Lamarca had hidden him somewhere, and perhaps the baby could still have survived. Then Lamarca explained what he had done next. He said he drove toward exit 37 of the Northern State Parkway, pulled away from the main road, and carried Peter into an area of thick brush. The baby was 1 month old. He could not understand where he was, follow Lamarca back toward the car, move through the vines, or reach the sound of traffic. According to Lamarca's statement, he placed Peter on the ground and left him there, alive. Then he drove home. The time was approximately 11:40 in the morning. 20 minutes later, Peter was supposed to be returned to his parents, safe and happy.
If Lamarca's confession was true, then while Betty and Morris watched the corner and waited for someone to bring Peter back, their son had been left beside a highway.
5 days later, Lamarca contacted the family again, gave them new instructions, sent them toward the blue bag and the second ransom note, and promised once more that Peter would be returned. But by his own account, Peter had not been in his care for days. The second promise had not been a path leading closer to their child. It had been another attempt to collect the money. Investigators took Lamarca to the area near exit 37. Evening was approaching, and he pointed toward a narrow path leading from the service road into dense vegetation. Agents and detectives entered the brush. Vines caught against their clothing while trees and leaves blocked the remaining light. They formed a line and searched. For 7 weeks, Peter had existed somewhere beyond the family's reach. Now the man responsible had brought investigators to one specific location. This was the closest they had been to an answer since the empty carriage. As long as nothing had been found, one final possibility remained. Lamarca could be lying again. Peter might have been taken somewhere else, and he might still be alive. The investigators pushed deeper into the brush. Daylight faded. At approximately 8:30 that night, the search had to be suspended. They would return in the morning. Once again, the case stopped at the edge of an answer. And once again, Betty and Morris had to wait through the night. At daylight on August 24th, investigators returned to exit 37. Dozens of local detectives and federal agents moved through the area, examining the ground beneath the vines. The location was close enough to the parkway that thousands of people had driven past it during the previous 7 weeks, yet none of them could have known what the brush concealed. Hours passed. Then an investigator noticed something small among the growth. A diaper pin. Nearby were pieces of cloth and other remnants. Betty Weinberger was asked to identify them. They belonged to Peter. A short distance away, investigators found the baby. The search that had begun with an empty carriage ended in the brush beside a highway. Peter had not been hidden in a room, and he had not been cared for while the ransom was negotiated. According to Lamarca's confession, he had been left there the morning after he was taken. Medical evidence attributed Peter's death to a combination of asphyxia, starvation, and exposure, but the exact time of death could not be determined. The medical examiner believed that, at the furthest possible limit, an infant might survive for days under those conditions. It was not a certainty. It was an estimate. But that uncertainty created one last horror the investigation could never resolve. When noon passed on July 5th, was Peter still alive? When Lamarca called again on July 10th, was Peter still somewhere in the brush? While Betty and Morris prepared the ransom for the second time, could their son still have been waiting only miles away? No testimony could answer, and no handwriting analysis could reconstruct the exact hour. The case had finally revealed where Peter was. They could never tell his parents how close they might have come to finding him in time. Angelo Lamarca was charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. His defense argued that financial pressure had damaged his ability to understand his actions, and claimed he had intended to return Peter rather than deliberately set out to kill him. But the kidnapping had not ended when LaMarca panicked at the first drop site. He drove away. He took Peter into the brush. He left him there. Then, days later, he contacted the family again and continued asking for money. On December 7th, 1956, the jury found LaMarca guilty. 1 week later, he was sentenced to death. His appeals failed. On August 7th, 1958, Angelo LaMarca was executed at Sing Sing prison. The consequences extended beyond LaMarca. At the time of Peter's abduction, the FBI had been required to wait 7 days before formally joining the kidnapping investigation. The case demonstrated how much could happen during that delay. Evidence could disappear, a victim could be moved, and a child as young as Peter could be placed in mortal danger long before the waiting period expired. New legislation, signed by President Dwight Eisenhower, reduced the period from 7 days to 24 hours. The law changed, but no law could change the 7 days that had already passed. The Peter Weinberger case became famous for the scale of the handwriting investigation. Nearly 2 million samples were examined, 16 letters were studied, and one unusual lowercase m helped lead investigators to Angelo LaMarca. It was an extraordinary forensic achievement, but the most disturbing part of the case was the normality surrounding it. The Weinbergers were not wealthy people guarded behind gates, and Peter was not taken from a locked room in the middle of the night. He was sleeping only a few steps from his mother on a summer afternoon. The man who noticed him was another father living in a nearby suburb. He passed their house, saw a sleeping baby, and decided that child could become the solution to his debts. Then he left behind a note. It began with an apology. It promised Peter would return safe and happy. Every new instruction gave Betty and Morris another reason to believe that promise. Every missed deadline took the hope away. On July 4th, the carriage had been close to the house. The neighborhood had felt safe, and the day was supposed to end with fireworks. Betty stepped inside for only a few minutes. When she returned, Peter was gone. And then it went dark. For another case where an ordinary community discovered that danger had been hiding close by, watch 5 Murders, No Face, No Answer.